This episode, I had the opportunity to speak with Reiner Kraft, a prolific inventor who had spent a couple of decades in Silicon Valley, working at IBM, Yahoo, etc., as an engineer and a leader, and eventually found his way into some mystical experiences that have caused him to now found the Mindful Leader Institute, where he is helping others to wake up and to become more present, more aware, focus on the KPIs of their mind, body, and soul, and be able to be more productive at work and increase the quality of their relationships. So, very interesting individual. Highly recommend having a listen. Thanks so much. Rainer, pleasure to have you. Thanks so much for giving us some of your time.
No,
Where
thanks
do you
for,
find yourself today? Are you in Germany?
yeah, no, thanks, Matt, for having me on the show. Yeah, I'm in Germany, a little bit north of Frankfurt, and yeah, living here in the countryside. It's
Very nice.
it's pretty nice when you look outside. Of course, you can't see it here now, but there is like everything is green, some meadows, forest.
I
So
was in Hamburg and Berlin earlier this year. My brother lives over there with his wife and daughter, and I imagine the countryside's probably a little different than Berlin.
yeah, absolutely. But I was just visiting Berlin earlier this week. It's always nice to get back there. I used to live there for about 7 years. It's completely opposite, but
Yeah.
but even there in Berlin, there is actually a lot of nature. If you go a little bit outside, a lot of lakes, water, forest. So yeah, it's also pretty good.
Yeah, I remember I was walking for, it felt like hours in a giant park that was properly in what seemed like downtown Berlin. So it definitely has its mix.
Mhm.
Um, so you are a very interesting character. You have a very curious background as an inventor from Silicon Valley back to Germany. And it seems like you are focused on helping people to become more mindful and consequently more grounded, more at peace, and therefore more productive. Maybe we could start by you correcting me on what I misunderstood, and then maybe we can get into a little of how you found yourself in this space.
Yeah, sure.
So let's start with what. How would you describe what you do?
Well, I think nowadays I'm completely focusing on helping others to, yeah, I think at the end it is increase the quality of their life with an upgraded mind, upgraded body, and more awareness, most importantly. And I try to do that with, of course, different approaches, different frameworks, different channels. Uh, but it all boils down to pretty much upgrade, right? Help them to, yeah, become better in what they're doing. And that idea, what I'm calling that nowadays a high performance mindset.
Hmm.
This is really what this is about. High performance mindset means that a mind, and for the mind, usually my analogy as a computer scientist is the mind operating system or the software of the mind. And that software is usually very buggy if it's not properly trained. And then the idea is, yeah, how can you upgrade that software? And to do that, you need awareness, being aware, being present, rooted in the present moment, so that you can actually look at that software properly without being distracted and getting tangled in all your thought activity. So that awareness is the key.
Hmm.
And I refer to this as your level of present awareness, your LPA, which is one of my mind KPIs, key performance indicators. And the higher that awareness gets, the better you can upgrade the mind. And then last but not the least is the mind itself requires the proper hardware, which is your body, the brain. And therefore, usually typically when I work with clients, through constant stress and just lack of balance, poor nutrition, sleep, exercise, all that stuff, the body is usually not in a great shape. And that has an impact on the performance as well. And so the high performance mind is when awareness meets the mind, meets the body, and put these three together. And now you incrementally try to improve all of them. And that has synergistic effects. So that is the strategy. And it works very well because I'm a data guy, I'm a science guy. I like to see numbers. And I know from working with many, many clients and of course myself that you can literally measure progress in all of these areas very closely. And then you can see how things are basically shaping up.
I love the analogy of the mind to software and the body to hardware. I I came to that conclusion myself over the last few years because the idea of as a baby you're coming into this world and you've got all the hardware and you have none of the software, and there's no operating system at all that you can tell. It's
Mhm.
sights and sounds and you're just meandering your way through, and you end up introducing bugs into the code because there's no user manual. And it's funny to think about, okay, so now you're going to go through this debugging, defragging type of situation later in life once you
Mhm.
wake up and realize what's happening. And I think that's the most challenging thing that I've observed, is that people seem to not necessarily be aware of this multi-part existence that they have between the mind, the body, their spirit or energy or whatever thing they want to call it. There's clearly something else going on in the background, whatever our consciousness is,
Mhm.
that can observe the fact that you have a mind, right? If you can
Mhm.
observe it, you're not it. So maybe let's talk a little bit about sort of your origin story. I believe that you had moved to Silicon Valley for a time. You were a high-powered engineer at places like Yahoo. Sort of tell us a little bit about how you got into that, what it was like, and then maybe what your aha moment was as you got into this field.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, back in those old days in the 90s, mid 90s, uh, freshly graduated from school and with a computer science background, I figured, oh yeah, let's go to California, Silicon Valley. That sounds like a lot of fun. And it was. And I spent about 20 years there. And as you mentioned, I worked for Yahoo, IBM Research prior to that. And yeah, pretty much went through an accelerated tech career, basically. And so far, so good. Life was good, but I could feel that at that point I didn't know a lot about the idea of stress or its effect it has on the body. And I didn't feel that stressed, right? If you think about it, you do your thing every day, you get up, go to work, and it's usually long work days. And even then, I think if you really look at this and say this is not sustainable, because there's only so much the body can do, but the body works fine, so you don't even think about it. You just
Mhm.
get going, right? And since you're young, relatively young still, um, it works out somehow. The body can compensate, but you actually it pays a toll on the body. And for me, at some point, I realized this was maybe back in 2012 or so. There was a state when I reached less and less energy, some kind of a mental exhaustion. Maybe that is a good way to phrase it. I just feel you have to work harder and harder to keep up on that level,
Mhm.
and it feels exhaustive, right? And uh, my body wasn't in a good shape after all as well. All kind of stress symptoms were creeping up. I went to several doctors, and of course they told me, "Oh yeah, all good," but it didn't feel good. And
Mhm.
And so I knew I had to do something. I had a pivotal moment when I was waking up in the middle of the night thinking I'm basically dying on a heart attack.
Mm.
And emergency unit came, they transported me to the hospital, they put me in all this equipment, checking things out. And um, yeah, that was a night that I never forget. And but on my way to the hospital, I pretty much all of a sudden was 100% calm, and I could literally watch myself. It's like from some higher perspective, right?
Mm.
Calmness, peace. You can watch yourself, say, what's going on here, right? And that was a moment that I still remember that feeling. And then in the hospital, of course, they did all these measurements, tests, and so on. They gave me a few pills and said, "Oh yeah, take this. It's some anxiety attack, something like this." I said, "Huh, what is this?" I had no idea what that was. And so yeah, I took the pills, was good. And next morning they released me. But I knew that was for me, that wasn't normal. So that was something I said, no, this can't go on. There has to be a change. And my employer, Yahoo, at that point, they offered a mindfulness class, MBSR. It's a standard mindfulness-based stress reduction class. And I said, oh yeah, it sounds cool. They were talking about mindfulness exercises, some meditation, and I didn't even know what meditation was. I
Right.
saw it in Star Trek with Spock, right, when he did meditation. So this is what, or from Star Wars, right, with Yoda when they. So that reminded me that, but I never considered that even for myself at that point. But it was relatively intuitive, and I was really go deep in deep meditative states during these first 2 or 3 sessions. Again, didn't have a clue what's happening here, and there were some really deep experiences in these initial meditation sessions. And I knew I was onto something, but I didn't know yet how to describe it and how to, most importantly, how to evaluate it. So in the terms of from my data background, science background, how do I know what this is? How can I track some stuff? I knew it feels good. I got calmer and calmer. Um, but yeah, how this was over the next few years, right? Was this nagging sin? How do I know this stuff is real, right?
Mm.
And so I kept exploring. I went through all kind of workshop retreats, got deeper and deeper in it. I also figured if it's good for me, it has to be also good for work stuff. And I tried to apply it at work. And later on, when I moved back to Germany and to Berlin, I joined Zalando, which is a major e-commerce fashion platform here in Europe. And there, I had a really large organization, so I could really then explore some of these ideas and see how can these ideas of mindfulness in the workplace, of an upgraded mind, right? How can that be applied, and how can it also be applied to leadership? As a tech leader, I was always curious, what's the secret sauce, or what's the secret recipe for becoming a good leader? And it was clear that that was it, right? So this combination of mindfulness, but figuring out how to really make this tangible, that was a key thing for me. And I came up with this approach of what I now refer to as measurable mindfulness. So it's adding a dimension of data to mindfulness,
Mm.
adding mind KPIs. I mentioned like level of present awareness. This was one of my earliest one where I said, "Oh yeah, this is great. Let's measure consciousness. Let's measure awareness. Right? Let's see what this is." And so those were those early things. And then in Berlin, I met some functional medicine experts because I was still figuring out how can I get my body in better shape. I
Mm.
had no medical background, and so but I was as a scientist. For me, I can absorb knowledge relatively quickly, effectively. I can make sense out of it. And then I realized while I was working with these functional medicine doctors that the body is at the end of the day this again this very complex hardware, but it has all these systems, and you have to just figure out what the systems are, how do they work, how can you measure them by looking at certain biomarkers, right? And with that in mind, I think you can pretty much start to do this optimization. And so that's what I was doing. So I was looking at the crossroads of the mind, basically, and looking at the body and bringing this together. And that was when this whole notion of what I mentioned earlier, the high performance mind, emerged. Because now all of a sudden I could see how the synergies are, how to bring it together. And then, yes, people ask me, how can I get there? Not like me in 10, 15 years, but how can I get there fast? And by fast, something like, let's say, 3 months, 4 months. That is usually realistic for this type of transformation. And that was when my high performance mind program was born, right? In about 2 years ago, roughly. And I figured, cool, let's try it out. And then I did a pilot. Then there were several mostly experienced tech leaders, executives. And I figured if these guys can do it and I can get through this
Mm-hmm.
successfully, then I'm on to something. And that's what I did. And it at the end, yeah, it worked out very well. The feedback was in general initially was that it's a little bit fast paced because people it's like uh, this tough like university class that some of you might be gone through where it's like boom 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 every week.
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to put in a little bit more breaks and iterate on the program to make it a little slower, a little bit more yeah in the terms of balancing it out so that it's a little bit longer. Nowadays it's more like 4 months, but then people feel that it's not that exhaustive, right?
Mm.
But you could do it in 3 months. So those initial participants, they did it in 3 months, and they showed clear breakthroughs on all of these different metrics. So it was verifiable, and it was, of course, not just verifiable by numbers. They actually felt it as well,
Quality
right?
of their life, right?
Yeah, it had big impact because there is the personal aspects at home, but then there's the work aspects. Whatever capacity you work in, maybe as a leader, as an individual contributor, whatever the job is, all of a sudden you realize you can put in more quality. It goes more effortlessly. You need less energy to do it. And yeah, I think the summary was that you can do more by working less and by feeling less stressed. So there's still the chaos around you. So that was one of the motivation for many to start. They were overwhelmed from all the surroundings, all the deadlines and the crazy stuff happening to them. So they felt like this is overwhelming. There was self-doubt creeping in and or negativity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Worry, negativity, that stuff. And I think that was the thing that the circumstances around them, they were still the same, but they're now the software now, right? The mind software was now able to process it differently, more effectively. And as a result of that, the impact on the body was basically mitigated and everything felt at ease, basically.
What a blessing to have made it to California and found Yahoo, because I have to imagine the number of companies at that time in the world that would have had a mindfulness stress reduction
Mm.
program on campus was probably close to zero. So to have found yourself at that very specific place at that very specific time,
Mm.
that's some serendipity.
Yeah, I think if you look back, a lot of stuff was lining up pretty much automatically. There's no effort in that one, finding that one, going into the next step, into the next step. It's just you basically have to flow basically with whatever comes at you, right? You just flow with it. And also when I created in my own company, the Mindful Leader, I had no ideas of what do I do now? What do I focus first? How do I evolve it? It all happens naturally. There's some impulse usually. People ask me something. And then I said, oh, I haven't thought about that. That's a good idea. And then you go in this direction. So it evolves in a very organic way. Um, and I think that approach in general works very well so far, based on my own experience. But something to explore definitely makes sense.
My personal conclusion is that being in flow state is heaven, and that being completely disconnected from it is hell. Because when you're in flow state, everything just works. It's like one foot in front of the other. There's no effort. It's like there's a divine hand putting the brick under your foot as you're stepping. Every moment of your life, whether you're dancing, singing, making love, creating something, inventing, it's just it's almost like you're not there. It's like
Mhm.
you take your mind out of the way and there's like a divine dance that happens and you're just witnessing it. First question, do you have any thoughts about that? And then second follow-up question, if you do think there's something to that, where do you think that comes from? What's your spiritual leanings?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think the flow state simply means being connected to the present moment. And if you're connected, then there is no thought activity. You're just there experiencing, doing some activity, maybe whatever it is, but you're fully connected, and that's why you feel good. It's effortlessly. It's just you unfold, and whatever unfolds, unfolds, right? You know how these things happen. I mean, back in the Silicon Valley, for me, one of my key strengths, I was a very prolific inventor. So creativity, doing something creative, was not something I sit there and then force myself to do it. It
Right.
was usually in these moments when I did a walk in nature, taking a shower, whatever. Uh, all of a sudden, there's no thinking, and then these ideas emerge. So there is something emerging, but it's not usually originating based on thought, but it's just going into your field of awareness, right?
Mm.
And that works very well. And for me, that was clear that as long so the state of a flow was something I've been in there for many, many years before for some portion of the day, mostly not that long. But I figured that is actually the natural state you want to be in. But unfortunately, through the lack of training of the mind, um, and that is what you mentioned earlier, there's a little baby, which is at the end of the day pure awareness, right? There is no ego yet. All these constructs, mental constructs, they're not there. It's like this unwritten piece of software, and then the software is evolving. It gets automatically buggy. It is what it is, right? Unless you become aware of it, and then you using neuroscience techniques. There's so many, so I got deep into neuroscience because I wanted to figure out, well, how do I do the upgrade? What are the options? And there's many options there to do it. You have to know how to do it, obviously. So there's the learning part to this. But with awareness, you can do that. And with meditation or formal meditation, as an example, you're going into this state really of awareness, and the activity of the mind ceases, it goes down. Another mind KPI is thoughts per minute.
Hmm.
Thoughts per minute
You
is
want it low, not high.
exactly. So thoughts per minute is exactly what it says. You calculate your average thought activity using some small exercises over the course of the day. You average it out to see what the baseline is. If you do this for a few weeks, you get a pretty good sense where you are. And Flow state usually means the thought per minute is zero. There is no thought. Then you're in a full flow, right? Once thought activity kicks in and the mind is not trained, then you usually get identified with those thoughts, and then from that one you're not fully aware anymore. You're, I call it unconscious, right? Because
Hmm.
now you're in this mind, and then there's the next thought coming up, and at some point you get out of it, and so then when you become aware again, so what was that? It's like daydreaming, right?
Right.
And so it's not untypical. When I start working with some clients, they have 8, 10, or even more thoughts per minute. That is the default. And that
Right.
doesn't mean, and that's not a flow state, right?
Yeah.
That's a stressful state. But that is the reality for most people with an untrained mind, and a level of present awareness, which is defined as the percentage of the day, of the waking day, that you're fully connected to the present moment. Usually that is somewhere between 2%, 3%. So that is a typical LPA if the person has an untrained mind. 2%, it doesn't sound like a lot. And yeah, it's not a lot, but that is unfortunately the reality, what it is. It's not,
I think the
it's
hard
more,
part
right?
for people is the more, if you think about the pathologies we create as children, either because of just normal trauma that we take on because our software is incomplete and we have no idea how to interpret the world, and things just create emotions that are too big for us to interpret, or you go through actual real trauma. Either way, it doesn't matter. You don't get out of childhood unscathed. It's not possible. So we develop these pathologies, and one of those pathologies is to become a high performer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm familiar with this because that was mine. And the more adapted into that pathology you become, the more you reject the idea that you're not the creator of your reality, and meaning your egoic self, right?
Mm-hmm.
This mind and the body, that you are the marionette or the puppeteer of the universe and all things good. And so the idea that you achieve nirvana by not having any thoughts is so counterintuitive to people who think that it's been their brain and their effort and this hard work that's created everything good, and that that's how you become elite and all the things you want. The notion that, oh wait, no, when they say Jesus take the wheel, what they mean is, and when they say surrender, it means just be here and just dance with what's in front of you. Like you said, be in this field of awareness, and everything will just happen, and you'll be at perfect peace, and everything will feel amazing. I
Yeah,
think getting people to even consider that paradigm is the biggest leap. At least that appears to be so from my perspective, is getting people to jump away from this notion of free will and that I will assert my dominance on the world to create my reality, to like, actually, wait, maybe I do the exact opposite and that's how I get what I want.
there we go. It is like, it's exactly like this. I think um, people usually, if their LPA level is that low, that means they spend most of the time in their mind and they're not really fully present. And some of them are so strongly associated with the egoic mind that it is what it is. There's not much going to happen. And you can't force it. And of course, you can tell them as much as you want. It's not going to work. Usually, the best trainer for this is suffering. Extreme suffering lets you reconsider things and usually gives you a little boost of awareness. Like also in my case, I had all of a sudden this ultimate awareness. That's how it felt, right? It's like there's
Hmm.
just there was not even myself anymore. It just was a big field of awareness. It was completely, everything was gone basically,
Some
especially
might
in,
call that a mystical experience.
yeah, exactly. That was what happening in this initial meditation. Of course I didn't have no clue how to phrase it or what just happened, but it was basically one of those experiences when there was emptiness, spaciousness, there was nothing anymore there. But it felt good, right? And it felt so good that my mind, after maybe a minute, got frightened about it. And then once the
Mm,
mind kicks in again, then everything is gone, right?
right.
And so, yeah, that's how it is. It's suffering if is usually your best teacher. So that's actually is a good thing that people basically not listening to their body, to tell them do it a little bit slower, right? Not listening maybe to some friends or family who have some good advice when it comes to
Hmm.
this. They just continue doing their stuff and it
Have
gets
a little
worse
more
and
Red
worse.
Bull.
Exactly. And then all of a sudden, at some point, the body tells you, that's it, red card, here it is.
That's right.
And then whatever that means, right? And then sometimes, if the suffering is strong enough, then there is this awakening process that is usually happening. It gives you this little boost, and that little boost might be sufficient to start this chain reaction, right? And of course, some people are lucky. They wake up next morning and they get this ultimate boost. And of course, I also felt lucky when I had that ultimate boost. But I also noticed it's not permanent. It comes and
Right.
goes, and you can easily get sucked into the thought activity again. But I also realized it's not happening anymore most of the time. For me, for instance, I just become aware when my mind gets active again
Hmm.
and wants to do its thing, and then I'm just casually looking at it, but don't get too worried about it. Oh, okay. And it's natural. The mind just does what it does, right? So it's for me, it's just observing. Oh, okay, cool. Uh, Usually, what helps then is okay. Let's do a small break, maybe. Let's go into nature. Let's do short walks, do short meditations, and breathing exercises, and that usually helps to calm the mind again. And
Hmm.
then you go back into the calm state of mind, which is definitely more enjoyable. But it could also be the mind stays active like this. For me, it doesn't matter. I just observe it. Uh, and at some point, I know it basically goes back to normal. But I also realize that is tied to the to your body, the process of how neurotransmitters get created, and also when the body needs to break them down again. And depending on your genetics, so I got deep into epigenetics, DNA, and so on, because I realized this is how the body is built. As a scientist, I need to know there's all these genes. They comprise the systems, and there's different systems there. And then, for instance, for neurotransmitters, there are certain genes associated. If they have some variations in them, then it could be they're running maybe some of these expressions running too fast or maybe too slow, right? And that has an impact on this whole system of neurotransmitters. And that's something good to know, right? For me, I know that, for instance, my COMT gene is one of those,
Hmm.
is working a bit slow. And that's a good thing. That means for me, I can generate these neurotransmitters in a very constant state. And that means I can be focused get work done for hours and hours without getting tired. But the problem is then when the work is over and getting into relaxed mode, there's
Mm,
still this level of neurotransmitters there. And so it takes longer time to break them down, right? And so
interesting.
that's why you can meditate as much as you want. I could sit there and let's say after a work day, I could sit there and I realize work is over. Let's go over to the casual part, but my mind is still going. I can observe this. I'm not getting stressed by it. Just realize, oh, it's still on. Interesting. Um, but what you can do is you can also hack the genes, right? Biohacking is the iterative process on how you can hack the body. And if you know that you have a COMT gene, which is like this, there is certain micronutrients, certain strategies that you can apply. And then instead of an hour or 2 hours to get back to a relaxed state, you can go into a few minutes into a relaxed state, right? It's just hacking the body, but you not need to know what you have to do, right? And that's why the knowledge of how to how the body works and how you can hack it to your advantage is so powerful, right? And that ultimately allows you then also to go into deeper meditation states, all the good stuff.
Mm.
But that's why you need to know, right, these different aspects. And that's why this high performance mind program is really a training, a learning experience where you learn all those fundamentals of the body, of the mind, and of awareness, so that you can figure out with this knowledge, you have the recipe how to apply it in your own world, right? What methods you use, it doesn't matter if you use meditation A, B, C, breathing exercise, some micronutrients, whatever it is, you have to just figure out what works for you. It's like little menu that you take a little bit here for the mind, here for the body, here for awareness. You play with it, see how it goes, and based on the KPIs, you can see something works well, then yeah, keep doing it. If it's not working well, then you change it, right? So that is this incremental biohacking approach. And
So the epigenetic component, I think
mhm,
there will be definitely some people who are very familiar with it and others who have heard it but have no idea what it really is. Is epigenetics basically the act of how genes turn on or off based on environment?
yeah, I think that's a good way to phrase it, right? Think about the genes based on your DNA is the blueprint. It's like a CD, compact disc, right? There's the bits and bytes on it. It's static, it's never going to change. But then on top of it, the CD player, there is a software that now can read this and it can interpret it and it can also manipulate it.
Mm.
It can turn things on, it can turn things off, it can make things faster, slower, and so on. So epigenetics is the software that controls the genes, right? And it's based, how can that be done? It can be done based on your environment. Environment, again, is everything around you and inside you, right? So your cells is a good example on cellular level. They have receptors and sensors. They can sense the environment. And based on the signals they are getting, they do a certain behavior, and then certain genes are triggered or not, right? And interesting thing is, of course, there's biochemical processes at work, but they can sense energy, right? They
Mm.
can sense actually your thought activity. If you have negative thoughts, they can feel that, they can sense that, right? And that for them, if they feel negativity, they basically are closing, they go in a lockdown mode, right?
Mm.
It's stress, lockdown, there's danger, right? And so that's why negative thoughts or stress get you in a lockdown mode on a whole body level. And that means nothing goes in, nothing goes out on cellular level. That's not good, right?
Right.
There's micronutrients, they need to go, and energy that needs to go into the cell. It can't get in there effectively. Or toxins, byproducts, metabolic products that get constructed in the cell, waste, pretty much waste, needs to get out, can't get out, right? And so that's why your thinking determines your health. So epigenetics also gives you a good explanation. You already knew that, right? If you think
Mm.
all the time this negative garbage stuff and you have stress all the time, people tell you stress makes you sick. There's no there's no surprise. It is like it is, and there's a lot of studies out there. But the epigenetics gives you the scientific background why this is happening, because these cells, they can basically sense this,
What you're
right?
describing also helps to explain several things in modern um, wellness, or the inverse, the sickness that has sort of swept the world, led by the United States in a lot of ways. Is if you think about a cell that's not able to take in the proper micronutrients and is not able to expel the proper waste, it doesn't take a giant leap to think how that could become cancerous, or how your body could start fighting itself, and how you could end up with these autoimmune conditions where suddenly nothing works the way it's supposed to and your body's attacking itself. And we lived for millennia with these things not being a major problem to all of a sudden it's an epidemic and people can't eat. Like the number of things people are allergic to is absurd and it's going up.
Hmm.
And the inflammation in people's bodies, I think, has a lot to do with what you're describing, which is if you can't expel waste, of course your body's going to get inflamed because it's literally a vat of poison that's that's continuously filling itself up. So I think that this whole field is fascinating and on the tip of the spear of puncturing something that has become all but a plague on society. Um, have you noticed a big difference in terms of base state of mindfulness? And it's kind of interesting because the more mindful you are, the fewer thoughts you have, right? So it's sort of a counterintuitive um, phrase in it to itself. Because I have to imagine that Silicon Valley is an interesting blend of people who are completely asleep at the wheel, have never had a mindful thought in their lives. And on the other side, there's lots of hippies and people who go to Burning Man and are doing psychedelics and are very in touch with all this stuff. And then the closer to a major city you get, I would imagine the more thoughts, the less mindfulness. And now you find yourself more, in a suburban or rural area. My experience is that the farther away from city life you get, the more living in the moment people tend to be. What have you seen?
Yeah, I mean it's hard to tell what I mean. There is an impact on the location, on the quality of life. I mean, I've seen the differences this week when I was in Berlin for a few days and experiencing the city life there, and then it's now back in my more yeah the village in a nature setting here, countryside setting. Yeah, it's a different ball game for sure. So it helps you to be more connected with nature. I think that is the most important thing. But on the other hand, I mean, people live in a city, they can still have a high LPA. They can still, yeah, be mindful. They can do all those things. It doesn't have to be like this. So I think it's more like a choice, right? I don't have numbers for this, but my guess is the distribution of people with a high LPA it's probably all mixed up. It's
Mm,
probably not location dependent. It's because at the end it depends. Just some people with a high LPA, they may decide, well, that city environment here is maybe not the best thing, so maybe let's move out, right? And on the other hand, they may say that, oh, I still enjoy this here. I like what the city offers me, the cultural aspects, work, whatever it is, right?
mm.
So I think it's more preference.
How do you go about measuring your KPIs? Because LPA sounds like a great thing to have as a toolkit, like if you could just strap on an Apple Watch that told you your LPA, but how do you actually go about collecting and validating that data?
Yeah, I mean, LPA is defined simply by the number of mindful minutes
Hmm.
that you accumulate over the course of the day as a percentage. So if you, let's say, do a formal meditation for 10 minutes, and then it could be that, for instance, my Oura ring here can be used for that. It measures this activity, meditation, mindfulness. It's integrated there. It writes it back to Apple Health. And then in the evening, I can look at that and 10 mindful minutes today. So that is a 1% LPA. Great. Um, there's other devices that track mindfulness, mindful minute. It has become like a default on those tech devices, but it's only half of the story. So it gives you something. So in the evening, usually you can go back at your smartphone. Then, if it's configured properly, you can see how many mindful minutes there are from that these apps are recording. But usually, what you need to do is manual tracking, right? So you have to figure out a
Mm.
way, and that's what they learn in the training. Use a spreadsheet or notes, right, and make references over the day. see how many minutes are there actually. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's not about perfect science here in the sense of I have 137 minutes. It's more like a ballpark. It's, let's say, more than 100. So that means an LPA greater than 10%, right? And that can be, as an example, you don't have to sit in a meditation to have a mindful minute. I can do a breathing exercise. I can do a walk in nature, being fully present. Let's say for 15 minutes, I bring in 15 mindful minutes. I can take a shower, pretty much focusing on the experience, maybe let's say 10 minutes, another 10 mindful minutes, right? Have a mindful lunch, being actually there, tasting the food fully, not playing on my cell phone while I
Mhm.
eat, right? So another 10 mindful minutes. It's a game of accumulating mindful minutes over the day. And then at the evening, you sit back, reflect, journal, figure out how many was it today, get a pretty accurate number if you're diligent. And then you can see, oh, interesting, more than 100. That is usually my goal, get people over 100 mindful minutes from maybe 10.
And most
And
people, I think, because society's almost driven all mindful minutes out of culture, right? At least if I look around the people around me and I observe my own behavior of like how have I gone over the years. When you're in the shower, you're listening to music or listening to a podcast. Same thing when you're driving. To your point, you're sitting down eating. Are you even experiencing what's going on? Even if that means having a conversation with somebody at the table, or are you reading something or playing a game or distracting yourself in some way? It's almost like or even just standing in line at the grocery store. People are
mhm,
incapable of being still for 30 seconds. It's the phone's got to come out and I'm reading Twitter or interacting with something in some way.
that's the busy mind, right?
And I
That's
think a lot of it, to your point about like the science and biology behind it, it's like we've destroyed our dopamine and serotonin reward systems to the point where if we're not drowning in something, it feels uncomfortable because we're so used to this. We've almost created like an arcade of life where we're constantly being rewarded for interacting with digital stuff. And then the notion of just being still, and it's almost like there's a subconscious fear that if I'm still, I'm going to be annihilated. And you have to practice sitting through it and saying, "Oh, wait, actually I don't." And it's completely fine, and if I sit long enough, it's actually profoundly beautiful.
yep.
So when you started doing all this, what was your family's reaction like? I'm trying to imagine a German family in the late 90s hearing a story from their son who's off in Silicon Valley trying to explain having mystical experiences. What was it like trying to integrate what you were learning with the people who were closest to you?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, in the first few years, I couldn't really describe all those experiences, what they were or what it is. For me, this was just a matter of being stressed, all of a sudden being less stressed. Then I learned the vocabulary, mindfulness. And yeah, I mean, close family, obviously, they could relate and they could see those actions. So I did changes in my lifestyle. So people became more aware of, okay, this looks like a different guy,
Hmm.
is doing different things now, thinks differently, gets less stressed. Pretty much, yeah, I think people recognize the change in behavior, but I didn't like communicate like, oh yeah, I have this, I don't know, uh, meditation thing going on or whatever. I mean, they wouldn't even understand if I was talking to my
Right.
parents about this. What is this? What are you talking about? So I wouldn't, and that wasn't necessary. It's more about they realize, oh, there's some changes here, interesting. And yeah, and that also made me decide back in 2016 to move away from the Silicon Valley, move back to Germany. That was one of the reasons as well, right? Because I figured the lifestyle there is not healthy for me. And no matter what company I switch to, it's basically the same thing.
Hmm.
I'm not changing my environment there, and I had the urge to change the environment.
What was it
But
about the environment that was toxic for you
yeah,
specifically?
it's just so it's everything there. It's like it's so crowded, sitting in the car, long commutes. It's just lots of people, right? It's this hectic, crazy lifestyle, which is completely normal there. But once you become aware and reflecting, is oh no, that doesn't make sense. And
Hmm.
the area itself is quite nice if you get a little bit out of the Silicon Valley, like you go to Santa Cruz, Monterey, Half Moon Bay. People
Big
familiar with the
Sur,
area?
Carmel,
Yeah,
some of the
there we
most
go.
beautiful places on earth.
Exactly. So when going there, sometimes over the weekends, that was a completely different experience. So from that perspective, that's why I always said, I mean, I could go back there. I like these areas. I could seeing myself living in Monterey or in Santa Cruz or Santa Barbara or even Newport Beach or whatever down the coast.
Hmm.
So there's nice places. So that's not, and they have a high quality of life for sure. But
High
in
cost of
this,
living too.
yeah, that's of course an issue. Yeah, yeah, that you have. But in the Silicon Valley itself, it's just crazy, right? I think, of course, you could, when the mind is upgraded, the body is upgraded, you can also survive that as well, and you can make it very pleasant. But as I said, there is a choice. You can do better. That was
Why
my
swim
thinking.
upstream when you can ride the log downstream?
There we go. Yeah, and that's what I think. That's what it was, right?
So, what do you find is common in the clients that you work with who have success? And I'm sure that most people do have great success, but I have to imagine it's not 100% hit rate. So, of the people who, the small percentage who might have either middling results or challenged results, like what do those people have in common?
Yeah, I mean that's hard to say when we're talking about success. You can have on a business side high success. You could be considered one of these top performing managers.
Elon Musk, right?
Yeah, but you could be on the flip side. You could live a miserable life, right?
Exactly.
And so success, real success. I think you have to define what actually success means to you, and also realizing that success metrics is usually not just tied to the work impact. Work is just one data point, right?
Right.
Um, but then there's also all the personal life, all the other instance, your
Does your
health,
family like
right?
having you around?
Family, right? So there is all those different things around you, and when you start more systematically defining what success means, you come up with a laundry list of here, da 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 da. And when you start yourself evaluating each of these aspects, then you can see where you are, right? It's different for everyone. So that's why I think um, from the outside, looking at other people, making a judgment whether they're successful or not, it's always hard because you can't look behind the curtain, right?
Mm,
So to speak. So that's why I think, yeah, and people who are not succeeding in business could also be related just to the busy mind, I call it the monkey mind, right? Could be related aspects to the monkey mind, poor health. I mean, if you have not a lot of energy right now with COVID in the past years, there's a lot of people experiencing. I have many clients here. They're coming in and they have long COVID symptoms,
mm,
post-vax symptoms, and so it definitely wasn't helpful for them in the with all the stuff going on for their health. And of course, they struggle if there's no energy left.
right.
How can they be successful in on the business side of things, but also on the personal side of things? So it's usually there is the correlation between awareness, the quality or the level of the mind, the level of the body. That's why I refer to the high performance mind when I put these three together.
Hmm.
And the higher the scale is for these different aspects, usually the higher the success is. It's a proxy, right? If you have a high level of present awareness, if your mind software is running smoothly and your body has full of energy and is resilient, I mean, life looks completely different, right? Then you can do whatever you want. If, I don't know, if you want to be, like in my case, doing some engineering work or doing leadership stuff, whatever, running a business, why not, right? You can do it. But I think the metrics are really around the high performance mind. So that framework works very well for me. It's measurable, and usually then I see a correlation. The higher the scores there are, the better is the personal and the business life, so to speak.
Hmm. Is there any parts of this interesting game or dream or play we call life that still puzzle you, that you're still working on? Because it seems like you've got a niche of things that have got sort of some predictable elements to it, repeatable. You've got a process and you've got success taking people through that. What what keeps you up at night? Not necessarily in a negative way, more just in a curiosity way.
Well, I mean, when I started on thinking about the progress for me myself, that I've realized, oh yeah, this is possible. You can upgrade awareness, mind and body. You can do it in a systematic, repeatable way. It's all doable. But unfortunately, I mean, what made me curious then is it really working for everyone? And the answer is it isn't. There are people who like to live in misery. They want to stay wherever trauma state they're in. Of course, you can show them here and here, but it's not resonating. So there is, yeah, it's not working. And then some of them, they may be interested to say, oh yeah, that makes sense. I could live a little bit healthier. And they know the consequences if they're not doing it, but they're deciding not to do so. And that is what's for me still puzzling, and what to make out of it. And I sometimes think it is what it is, right? I had a potential client. I know him for quite some time. This was just happening today. Um, I told him, "Oh, look here, I know this guy. Definitely is one of those entrepreneurs, very busy guy, successful, but not. When you look at him, you can already see not very healthy."
Mm.
And so I told him, "Oh, look, I have this biohacking weekend coming up here in October, 3 days, Friday to Sunday. It's workshop stuff, hands-on biohacking technologies around there that you can try out. And we do some measurements, we do personalized micronutrients protocol for you. So it's a great thing. You get in Friday, Saturday, Sunday, get out, and you did something really meaningful for your body." And so I told him about it, and he said, no, I'm too busy. For me, the focus is business, boom, 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 some business stuff. So important. It's so important, right?
Mm.
And I told him, well, you know, and then he said, oh yeah, I know from the past 30 years, I've been doing that. It worked for me very well. And so I told him, well, look, it worked very well, but let me be clear, it may not work very well in the future. Become aware of that, right? And I think he knows that this is the case, but he lives in this bubble, right? That he thinks this is not, I'm above that, right? My body
Mm.
is just, right? And those kind of things, they puzzle me, right? When I see when people run in this downward spiral, and it's happening, and they don't do anything. Or I have another client, she's a little bit older, in the 60s, completely overweight, and all the markers around diabetes and all that stuff, they're pointing and not so positive outlook, right? So you would say, oh man, I that would be definitely a warning sign, right? But there is no energy to make the change because change takes energy
Right.
and it's not going to happen somehow, right? So some people, they actually know what to do. And even like in my case, if I serve them all the stuff on a platter, here, look, it's very easy. A, B, C, just do it. It's not going to happen. And I think that is something where I still have to make peace with that. It is just what it is, right? We're not supposed to, all of us, to reach these higher levels of awareness. If we do, then fine. If not, that's also okay. I think that's the thing, right? We just live, see what happens, and but for them, for those who experience a boost, little boost or kickstart in awareness, usually they at that point then are becoming aware that, oh yeah, I need to make a few
Yeah,
changes, and
there's
then
work
they
to
go, there's work to do, and then they can decide how much work they want to do, right? Because everything is a choice, how much work you want to put in there. And of course, there's extreme biohackers. They're out there. They're pretty much, yeah, they do a lot of stuff. Like Dave Asprey is, for instance, one that definitely very inspirational. But yeah, they live it every day. Like, and for that already, when you read about it, it becomes stressful. And you think, oh
right.
my goodness, right?
You
So
can
it could
definitely
also,
overdo anything.
yeah, you can overdo anything a little bit, right? But yeah. Anyhow, I think that's yeah.
I think it's a really interesting point, and I think it plagues a lot of people who would intend to do well in this world. You think about some of the social justice warriors who want the world to be a peaceful place full of equity, where everybody has an incredible experience and they never have struggle. And I think if you take a wide enough lens and observe enough time, you can see that that is simultaneously impossible and antithetical to whatever the design of the universe is. Because if you talk about software or even architecture, there's something going on in this universe, right? Like, there's a reason why 2 plus 2 equals 4. There's a reason why gravity exists and acts the way it does, and the space-time continuum and the electromagnetic spectrum. All of it exists by some kind of a design. We have no idea what it is. I think it's unknowable. But one of the things that appears to be true is that this notion of yin yang, where there's the quote unquote the light and the dark, the good and the bad, that if one of those things took over and there was only good, I get the impression that the game would end. Meaning that like the universe would just stop existing and a new one would start. Because you can't you think it would be enjoyable to sit around and just feel in complete bliss all day. But it's like the crash of a cymbal in a symphony. If all you had was crashing cymbals, that wouldn't be a particularly enjoyable melody, right? And if all you think you might want to sit around and have an orgasm all day, but there are people who are actually afflicted with that and they'll tell you it's living hell, right? To have the same peak experience relentlessly, you don't feel anything else. There's something about this symphony of good and bad and light and dark that is what makes the fabric of the world interesting enough to engage with. And I think there's a huge amount of work on my own part, and it sounds like this is also what you're working on, is letting go of the idea that it can be perfected by our hand and that there's a way it should be. And instead just to the earlier point about flow state, flowing with whatever is directly in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on why we're here? What do you think we're doing here?
Mm, I mean, I think it's a more philosophical discussion around at the end where we are the universe, right? We are part of the universe or whatever. We are the universe, and I think the universe, the beauty is becoming aware of itself through us,
Hmm.
right? So I think that's the thing why we're here is basically become this experience what is, right? And if you think about it, there's so many human beings, I don't know, 8 billion or whatever the number is, and each of them is like this little, and you look at it from space, right? You can't even see them, right? These little specks,
Nodes.
right? Little nodes in this, many of them. There's all the animals as well, right? Plants, animals, and so on. And at the end, it's all each of them, each of this node at the end is an opening of awareness that so the universe becomes aware. That's it, right? And becoming aware of itself is, I think, that's the interesting part for humans that they can become aware of being aware. Animals
Hmm.
don't, right? Animals, they are aware, plants are aware, but they're not becoming aware of that they are actually aware, right? So it's an interesting twist, and I think that's what makes humans or other sentient beings interesting, that they you can actually become aware of that you are aware, that you are awareness, that you are at the end you are the universe. If you think about it, right? This little thing, but you just this body is just this little thing. It comes and goes, and if you look at it in terms of a timeline, sometimes you see these animated things. Here's the Big Bang, and it takes like a billion years and another billion years and so on. So if you put your life actually on these timelines, right? It's like it's not it's exactly like this, right? It's this little clip, can't even see it. That's what it is, right? But for that little moment, and maybe that little moment is, I don't know, if you're a biohacker, usually you try to reach at least 100 years or more. This whole topic of longevity is very popular. But even then, if you make it 100 years, then yeah, it's this little blip coming into existence. And so that's why I would say also don't take everything too seriously, right? Enjoy things as they are. Increase your LPA. It's definitely, if you're up for it, do it. And yeah, be this field of awareness most of the time. And again, you don't have to be it all the time. You can sometimes drift away in your old busy mind. But my experience tells me the more you're rooted in this state, the less busy it becomes. And at some point, there is not much thought activity going on anymore. Of course, doesn't mean that you're at some point that you're now completely like brain dead or something.
Right.
It just means the mind is a peaceful state. And of course, if you need the mind on demand, you access it, you do the computation, and it can be very efficient to do it.
Becomes
But
a tool as opposed to the driver.
yeah, exactly. And so that's, I think, would be my thinking about this, right? Being this little window of the universe, looking around you, experiencing whatever there is to experience. And yeah, and then it's your choice of this, if this is something that you consider a pleasant experience or if it's a dreadful experience or misery. It's really completely up to you, right? It's what you make out of the situation.
I think that's exactly right. Well, Rainer, it's been an amazing conversation. Like I said at the beginning, you're a fascinating individual, and I think you're doing very important work because the number of people who are extremely sick in this world and getting sicker is increasing every day. And what's the blessing behind that is folks like yourself appear to be popping up in greater and greater numbers, right? So as the illness presents itself, so is the solution. So thank you for the work that you're doing. I think it's extremely important, and I'll make sure that I link to all of your sites in the show notes so people can find you and your research and your programs. And I actually work for a company out of Germany, so I'll be sure to send this to them so that they can see
Yeah,
about
there we go. Yeah.
coming to any of your local events. It sounds like that long weekend biohacking thing is quite interesting. Anything that you want
Yeah.
to leave people with?
No, no, thanks for Matt for having me on the show. And I think for those listeners who feel a little inspired maybe by some of the points, whatever it was, yeah, take advantage. Now you're in this inspiration mode and then see if there's little things you can do to work on your LPA, right? I think that would be my word, right? Try to let it sink, and the concepts are relatively easy. I explained them, and becoming a little bit more mindful every day can't hurt. It's not much work, but do it for a while and see what happens.
I love it. Well, thank you, sir, and looking forward to seeing where your work takes you.
Very good. Thanks. Yeah.
Cheers.